about 3 years ago when a colleague of mine in the journalism department was at an academic conference in North Carolina. She was talking about a community partnership that she had in Valley, Alabama. And after her presentation, this strange woman walked up to her, Charity Ritchie Bentley, and said, "I want to tell you about Hobson City." Nan Fairley, the professor who will be here tomorrow for the park unveiling, came back and said, "Mark, we've got to talk about Hobson City." The enthusiasm of Charity Ritchie Bentley and the story of what the corporation, the development corporation, was doing in this town was just too much to let go. At the same time that conversation was going on, we were conceptualizing a new program in our college called Living Democracy, where we have students who, in 7 different communities around the state, we were choosing the communities at that time, so it was fortuitous that Charity came to that conference and spoke to Nan afterwards. The students who live in a community for 10 weeks in the summer, after they've spent a semester or 2 learning about that community and having conversations about that community's hopes and that community's dreams. And so students live in that community, and so our first student finished last year, Marian Royston, who's going to speak in just a moment. Our second student begins tomorrow and will be at the park unveiling with all of you there. We consider Hobson City a community partner that is excellent, and here's why. You've got local people working together to revive this wonderful town. It's very impressive to all of us at Auburn, and this program that we are a part of is select. Only 7 communities are participating. It's been recognized by the Kettering Foundation and also by the Chronicle of Higher Education as a unique partnership and a unique way for students to learn what it means to live in community and what it means for community change. Marian Royston, who's going to speak to you in just a moment, is from Roanoke, Alabama. She was a history major, political science minor, community and civic engagement minor. This fall, she will go as one of 12 prestigious scholars for the George Mitchell Scholarship Program as part of the U.S.-Ireland Alliance, one of 12 in the nation, who will go to Ireland and study rural community development. And when she goes to Northern Ireland to study, she not only takes all of her experiences that she had in the classroom, but most importantly, she takes you with her. And she is committed to coming back to the state of Alabama to work in community development with local communities. And I thank you for having a part of her educational experience while she was at Auburn. Thank you for allowing us to be here tonight.
Thank you, Professor Wilson. Great job, by the way. And as he was speaking about Marian, I want to bring Marian on up right now, Auburn University alumnus, Marian Royston. Getting ready to go to Ireland.
Good evening, everyone. While Dr. Wilson is getting ready to help me out by working PowerPoint, I'll go ahead and set the stage for what I'm about to present tonight. And before you see the title flash up, which looks very, very inflammatory, I promise it's really not. I won't really get into all of that. But I came into the Living Democracy Project at the end of my sophomore year. As a history major, Dr. Wilson kind of sold me on Hobson City's history. He told me, and I met Charity and Eric at a community partner luncheon a few days after I actually learned about Hobson City, and I was sold immediately. And so from there, I've kind of had the dual job of learning about community development and also learning about the history of this town, because I find it very, very fascinating for reasons that you'll find out very, very shortly. So for the fall semester, I spent time between Auburn's library, the Tuskegee Archives, and the Alabama State Archives looking for information about Hobson City. And let me tell you, it's very, very elusive. It's difficult to find, but I did find something that no one's probably ever seen before, which is very exciting, and I'll share that with you all tonight. So we've already talked about Hobson City's future and its recent past, but now let's jump back to its very, very beginning. So here's what we already know about Hobson City. The same old story, the bare bone facts that we already know. Hobson City is Alabama's first all-black municipality that was founded in August of 1899. And that's fascinating, and that's great, and that's very, very interesting. But in my mind, as a history major, that actually creates more questions than it answers. After all, the big question to me is, how in the world could a group of black people create a town right before a constitution was formed that took away the right to vote from just about every single black person in the state in 1901? So that is what the big question is. So we'll go. My big question for my paper that I wrote is, how could an all-black town be founded in the late 19th, early 20th century when the politics of white supremacy were quickly taking hold across the state? And I won't get into it tonight, but in my paper you'll find those politics hadn't quite taken hold yet. It's a psychology that takes a while to take hold. But I also had some little questions that I answered in the paper that I examined, and I just dove in and tried to answer those questions. And they were, how could Hobson City, which is a direct contradiction to the tenets of white supremacy, survive in that environment? And how can Hobson City's history inform our knowledge of white attitudes towards the quote-unquote Negro problem? And I'll explain what that Negro problem is soon. And also, what did blacks think about their place in Southern society, and what kind of hopes for advancement did they have? And how does Hobson City fit into this whole story? Because it has to fit somewhere. So, what's this so-called Negro problem? And what in the world is going on in Alabama at the turn of the 20th century? The first thing that's very, very important to understand is that Hobson City was established before the 1901 Constitution. And this Constitution, for all of you that may not be as abreast of Alabama history as I am, is that this Constitution served to disfranchise African Americans and poor whites. It took away their right to vote, and it took them out of the political process, essentially. And so, but the process to create this Constitution was already in place. So when Hobson City came about in the late summer of 1899, it's a very, very interesting time politically for the state of Alabama. So it's very, very curious that it was even allowed to happen. And although Southern whites did disagree on how to best manage the black population, because that is the Negro question, how do you best manage black people? What do we do with them? How do they fit into American society and politics? They all agreed that African Americans at this time had no place in government. Whether they agreed that we should treat them well and be nice, or whether they agreed that they should be set aside for no reason, everyone agreed that African Americans should be out of Alabama's government at this time. And so, as you see, there's varying degrees of political mentality at this time, and it caused conflict. And just as whites differed on how to best manage African Americans at the turn of the century, African Americans also differ on how to manage themselves. So, because just to give you an illustration of that, the whole debate between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, and Hobson City more so goes with Booker T. Washington and his philosophy of uplift by work and learning from the bottom up, so to speak. So there was a little bit of political controversy surrounding Hobson City in its first 10 years in existence. Twice in the span of 10 years, the city of Oxford attempted to have Hobson City's charter revoked. The first time was in 1907, when the state legislature just extended the corporate boundaries of Oxford to encompass Hobson City. But Judge Thomas Coleman declared this null and void. He saw through that, and he was an unbiased judge. And the second time was in 1909 with House Bill 258, which was an act to abolish the charter of Hobson City, which was signed by Governor B.B. Comer and just did away with it during a special session of the legislature. And there's actually no evidence as to when the charter was regained, but as we see, Hobson City still exists, so therefore it was regained at some point. But as a result of the 1901 Constitution, another political controversy is that Hobson City actually didn't have anybody that was eligible to vote within the town, which is also a complication. So you see, within 10 years of the town being in existence, Hobson City just struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled. And the struggles didn't quite end there. So the question is, how did the town survive? Well, the town was not coincidental. It wasn't just a bunch of people that just opportunely said, we're going to get together and form a town. There was planning involved. planning, planning, planning. And in a document that was found in a dusty book in the archives of Tuskegee University, Mayor S.L. Davis in 1901 gave a speech before the National Negro Business League. And he spelled out exactly what the citizens of Hobson City planned to do, and exactly how they planned to run their town, and exactly what kind of citizens were supposed to be living in Hobson City. And I'll read you an excerpt of that. He says, "Every Negro who desires to have an incorporated city should ask himself the following questions. What are your motives for desiring to be incorporated? The true answer should be to become true citizens in the state or territory in an incorporated community for the purpose of enjoying the city's benefits. As near as practical, let these principles be laid in the breast of every citizen of the incorporated city." And in the course of his speech, he also lines out how the city will be run and how every citizen in the city shall behave and who should be excluded from the city. Because you have to realize this is during the progressive era. They're very concerned with how everybody behaves. And so they don't want, and because they have to be so concerned with image, because if they do anything wrong, people are going to say that it's because these people are bad, and say because they're African Americans and they can't handle themselves. They can't allow these people into town at all. And one of the funniest things I think he said when he says that, he said the lewd and murderers and thieves will never stop in his city. And he says, "My mother was never afraid of the wild turkey taking up with the tame, but she was afraid of the tame ones taking up with the wild ones." And that was his philosophy on who should live and be in Hobson City. But the point is that the early leaders of Hobson City were very shrewd, and they understood the environment under which they were coming into existence. They understood that Hobson City was in a very precarious position and that it had many, many enemies. And the first year alone was very, very difficult because of the law at the time, they weren't privy to county funds. So the city was funded by pretty much a love offering from the public. They raised $500 to fund the city by asking people in town to do it. And additionally, and this is a quote from Wayne Flint's Alabama in the 20th century, there was a struggle to attract businesses and pay for city services, which I think we've heard that story before. Even the name Hobson City is strategic. It's patriotic, and patriotism is good, right? They wanted everything about them to exude the image that they are the model African American citizens. Because they wanted to assume their full place in American society. They really had no other agenda than that. They wanted their fair chance to have everything that everyone else had, a chance to have full rights of citizens, really. And the town leaders were very interesting because looking at census records in 1900, all of them, they were the ones that had jobs that weren't day laborers or menial jobs. They owned their own land. They were farmers or something of that nature, or they had a trade. Like, I think one of them was a blacksmith off the top of my head. But within the span of 10 years, by the 1910 Constitution, by the 1910 census, several more people in Hobson City also owned their own land, and they also had better trades. So the leaders were very effective in what they were doing. And there was also an 18% population growth in Hobson City in its first 10 years. And there was more property ownership overall. And they also established the school. So despite the fact that they started with nothing, they weren't even able to get anything in the first year. There were several threats to the town's mere existence. They still persevered, and in the first 10 years, they made that much progress. So, in conclusion, Hobson City's survival wasn't a coincidence. It was because the leaders were aware of what was going on. And it also wasn't, they weren't doing it because they had ulterior motives. They truly believed that Booker T. Washington's ideals of hard work and thrift was how they should live their lives. They believed that working hard and paying your dues to society was how you earned your place in society. And they wanted to become a model black community, as S.L. Davis said in his speech before the National Negro Business League. So I thank you all for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them after the program's over. Thank you.
I think Marian and Professor Wilson deserves a bigger applause than that. I told Marian when I hugged her, I said, thank you for teaching me about my city. I learned so much from that presentation that I did not know, and I lived there 23 years. So thank you, Marian. Thank you for teaching me about my own community. I appreciate that, big time. All right. I want to say thank you to Big Money Grip coming up here.